Welcome to the second episode of explAInED. Sean, how do you say our podcast?
explAInED.
Okay, well, don't say it like that, but welcome to the second episode.
I say explAInED.
Okay, I'm glad you
explAInED.
did that. Okay, yeah. explAInED. We're having Brian Glenney on the show today. He is an associate professor at Norwich University, and he has some amazing things to share with us. But before we get to that episode, Sean's going to update us on some current events happening in the land of AI. What do you have there, Sean?
Well, I have a recent article on from Kevin Rose, who's a New York Times columnist. I guess you could say a tech columnist, and he's arguing that artificial general intelligence, what people are calling, the term they're throwing around is AGI, is approaching faster than most people realize, and we're not even close to being ready for it. That's in education, but that's also everyone, everywhere, government, society, etc.
Are you able to tell us what that is? Yes,
AGI. There's people, of course, that don't like the term. There's no, it's one of those things where nobody has agreed on an exact definition. But I think most people understand it as it's when an AI is as or more capable on cognitive tasks than a person. So it's either equal to or greater than a person on cognitive tasks. I'm not saying the AI is better than a person, but yeah.
Well, that was extremely cheery news there, Sean. So basically, none of us are ready for any of this. There's a storm coming.
Yep. Is that a Terminator 1 reference or?
No, but thank you for taking it there. That's
okay.
Great. That's fantastic. All right, so let's get to Brian and see what he has to say.
There we go.
We're live-ish, not really. So welcome to explAInED. We are terrible at naming shows, Brian, so I apologize in advance for that. But we are here with Brian Glenney. He's going to talk to us about all things in life. Hopefully a little bit about skateboarding as well. But
Oh yeah.
Brian, could you start off and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Norwich University in Vermont. And I teach a lot of ethics classes, including AI ethics. And publish a lot on sensory perception and how the senses integrate. I've got a book on that just came out. And then I also, as you mentioned, my gosh, I publish on skateboarding, which has this really unique character of taking parts of the city that aren't meant to be used for play, and they use them for play. So a lot of diverse interests, and and AI is one of them. So I appreciate the invite.
Am I noticing correctly that you're in a bit of a soundproof drum cage there?
Yeah, I'm in my kid's recording studio.
Nice.
And I was like, hook me up with a mic, and he's like, well, I don't have one that attaches to a computer, so. When at this level, it doesn't work for amateurs, right? Like us.
Right. So, Brian, when we say AI, we've determined that means something different to different people. So, can you tell us what AI means for you?
It means it's a unique kind of intelligence. Boy, philosophers would say sui generis, which means of its own kind. So it's not going to ever be like human intelligence or animal intelligence, for that matter. It's always going to have its own way of doing its thinking, its cognition. So that's one way to think or that's how maybe a lot of philosophers think about AI. And I guess the question is like, is this new intelligence good for humanity or is it bad for humanity?
Yeah, I saw a thing today. I thought of you as I was researching ethics and AI, and they made this comparison to philosophers of old and how they were dealing with questions of ethics that hadn't been asked before, and that started to define philosophy in a way. And then they were comparing it to today, where these questions about AI and ethics haven't been asked before. So it's new challenges and new problems, and that just makes a lot of sense to me, what you said about it not being human intelligence and the philosophical end of it. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to butt in every single time you say something brilliant, but let me add, I don't even think we are asking the right questions yet.
Ooh.
You know, we're still kind of stuck in the Turing test paradigm. You know, is this, you know, human level intelligence? I just think we're approaching things from wrong angles, and I think we need to kind of blow things up a little bit and think fresh. So yeah.
One of my questions I was going to ask you, you kind of just answered it, but was like, if you ever thought AI would be able to perceive things the way humans do, and it sounds like you're saying they won't. They'll have their own fundamental way of perceiving the world. I'm just wondering, like, what is the difference in your mind to how an AI would perceive the world versus a human?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think if you were trained only on text, right? I think that's most of these large language models. They're all just trained on mass amounts of text. And so when you read their text, you know, it's making these predictions about what you're expecting to, you know, to be prompted by the next statement so that you can kind of follow along. And that really does simulate the way that humans write, but it certainly doesn't simulate how we think. I mean, I'm not using predictive processing as I'm talking to you. There's a self-referential component where I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about and how best to kind of relay that to my audience. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with the training. There's a thing called a grounding problem in AI, namely that it doesn't seem like all the senses, all the ways that we acquire our data as human beings are acquired that way by machines. So until that happens, right, there's going to be distinctive ways that these machines, you know, cognize the world. So yeah, and again, the grounding problem is this sensory one. I'm dealing with gravity. I'm dealing with ecology. I'm dealing with like needing coffee. All these things are really crucial to being human. And gosh, AI just doesn't deal with those things.
Yeah. So when, you know, prompting in AI is king. So when people are prompting and saying to AI, pretend that you are a psychologist, pretend that you are this, act as if you are this, what you're saying is that there's a whole ton of things left out of that pretending that AI can never acclimate to or relate to.
I mean, I was just in Holland at the Van Gogh Museum, and you know, you're just looking at all of his portraits of himself, self-portraits. And I remember punching in, you know, hey, give me a Van Gogh skateboarding photo. And it produced this thing that looked like, you know, starry night there's even sunflowers. And I was like, oh man, I wonder if Van Gogh would ever paint that. You know, and going to that museum, I'm like, there's just no way. You know, when you learn about things in Van Gogh's life that made him paint the way that he painted, this is just like another way to illustrate how distant AI is from human intelligence, in particular, like specific human intelligences.
I think maybe AI is or intelligence, using that word as a misnomer.
Mm-hmm.
So, as an educator, like, how do we work with students to, like, where is the line drawn between human control and machine, like, decision making? Because someone that we talked to earlier in another episode talked about, AI and this human in charge, but AI in the loop. So when you work with your college students, how do you talk to them about that?
Oh yeah. I mean, it makes me think back to when I was in kindergarten and calculators first came out. Do you remember this? Maybe, or maybe I'm just so old, I'm the only one that's and I snuck a calculator in to take an exam. And I was so proud of myself. I'm like, I'm going to get 100%. And I keep thinking to myself, is this like what students are doing? In every, while I'm discussing, while I'm lecturing, I'm waiting for students to ask questions. And I'm watching them read off their screens questions to me, questions that AI formulated. And I'm always just like, hey, this isn't, you just should shut your computer. Just like, you should be doing the reflection. You should be doing the thinking. And I think what I'm finding, and I think a lot of other professors and secondary ed and everybody is finding, is that students are offloading every cognitive demand onto AI and then just kind of copy and pasting as if like they're getting the right answer. This is for coding as well in computer science. I just read an article of a computer science teacher saying, my gosh, my students actually aren't learning coding, right? They've just figured out methods for AI to do it. So I don't know. I think we should offload some cognitive tasks. Getting in a hotel. It'd be so awesome if you could just like, hey, this is when and where, and I don't want to pay more than $80. And an AI just comes in and does all the work. That seems like a reasonable cognitive task to offload. But critically thinking, reflecting about really complex ideas, that's hard, right? But I think it's something I'm trying to get my students to do. But again, their immediate reaction is to offload that. I don't know if that answers your question, but what I am in dire straits, or I think education is in dire straits, because I don't know exactly what this generation believes should be cognitively offloaded and what it should think about. You know what they love to think about? Social things, friends, hanging out. And I'm like, yes, but that's something actually I would rather cognitively offload. Man, hanging out with people is so distressing for me and frustrating. It'd be so nice if I could just offload some of that.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I bet you were excited to join some strangers for a podcast then. Yeah.
It's so funny.
Well, you keep like answering my questions before I can ask them, because one thing I was wondering is like, one thing I'm worried about, and this is true for when I look for like art online, like if I'm just looking for pictures of something, or what you just said with students just asking questions that AI came up with, like, and I think we're already seeing it. I think that there's this kind of flattening effect happening that I feel like that's kind of how I describe it. But and so I'm worried that everything is, or not, maybe everything is a little strong, but things are becoming more muted as far as I don't know, creativity and thought. And so I am worried about that.
Yeah. I love that image of flattening. That is somewhat terrifying to me, because AI really is good at imitating creative artifacts. I I just keep wondering, if so when it does that and you start to believe that some of these imitations are actually the authentic work of some individual, then your taste is affected, right? This is the real worry that I have, is some kind of like reciprocating feedback loop where you get stuck on liking the AI, fake work instead of the authentic work. And then, the AI work becomes then preferable, right? Again, AI is a different kind of intelligence than human intelligence. So you can see how perhaps, wow, we can work ourselves into just a pure AI society. Now, I worry about that only because I'm a creative, and as a human being, that kind of authenticity is really important to me. But maybe some people aren't as worried about that.
Brian, I wanted to ask you a question that I think the underpinnings of our show and our questions and everything are, like you said in the beginning, maybe we're not asking the right questions, but one of the challenges that we're dealing with in education in particular, and I'll use cell phones, for example, and an analogy that a colleague of mine often uses about either you cover the pool or you teach the kids to swim. And
Nice.
so, right. So we're in an age where a lot of high schools are banning cell phones for students, which I can support. I can get behind that as a guy with a flip phone still. I can get behind that. But I also think that there's a lesson in that maybe we didn't do enough intentionally a while back, and maybe we didn't know that we had to do enough intentionally a while back to give students what they need to swim versus covering the pool. And I worry about that with AI, and AI is moving twice as fast or faster than cell phone evolution was. And so I don't know how to parse that challenge with all the human emotion that goes into a conversation with something like AI.
Yeah.
Fix that for me.
Human emotion, that's a big one. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this author I love to read, Haraway, Donna Haraway. She has this paper from 1995 called the Cyborg Manifesto. And her claim is all this machine learning is something that we're already part of. I mean, think of, prosthetic limbs, even just using a notebook to offload our thoughts. And so they're stored. It's kind of like human memory, right? We're always extending our mind into objects, cognitively offloading to free up our minds for other tasks, right? And so, again, I think that's the open question, is what do we want to free our mind to do? And I wonder if this generation, it wants to free its mind so it can just hang out with friends and socialize. And I'm saying, it sounds like I'm saying that's a bad thing, but I actually think it's an incredible thing. If you watch Star Trek Next Generation, it really seems like in 400 years when we've solved poverty and like we have warp drive, people are just going to be very excited to meet new species, right? And have kind of social interaction with them at all different kinds of levels. And so it seems like our technologies can free us up to become more social beings. So Donna Haraway is basically saying like, yeah, we should want to move in this direction. It's kind of like crossing, boundaries that we didn't think could be crossed, and allowing us to be, in some sense, like transhuman. She uses it, but I think it's maybe like you're being more human. After all, humans are these social animals. And if we can use machines to free us up to be more social, I don't see a problem with that. So that's where, gosh, I don't know what we're cognitively offloading, or which tasks to cognitively offload to free us up to do other tasks. I don't know what those other tasks should be. But I think just given this next generation, boy, socializing seems of primary importance.
I like how Sean and I like high-fived when you said Star Trek, and Renee just glared at us.
Yeah.
Tuned out.
No, I
Just
often,
kidding.
yeah, like I wish we were moving towards a near utopian future like that. But I think a lot of people have talked about this, that our first battle with AI in recent memory was with social media, and preparing our kids for that, which we didn't, and we lost that one. And so now here we are.
Yeah.
And like you said, maybe we're not even asking the right questions. It sounds like you're saying one of the questions we should be asking is what is appropriate to upload to AI, and what should we grapple with ourselves? Is that what you're saying is the question?
Yeah. What are we freeing ourselves up to do? And honestly, if it's just hanging out and skateboarding, I'll throw it out there, and we can let AI do all the other work, that doesn't seem harmful. That actually sounds kind of utopian. It is interesting because Marx is all about just to throw Marx in there. My gosh, but we want kind of control over the means of production, right? Over what we create and how we think. And of course, we can't have that in every facet of our lives. So I think that maybe the open question, by the way, this is fresh. It's not like I've thought about this before. So I really appreciate this conversation. It really does seem like we should want to know first what we want to be freed up to do. What do we want to produce as humans in this technological age, in some sense, not run by AI, but incredibly influenced by AI? What do we want to teach our kids to produce? And what skills do we want to kind of inform them with so that this production becomes like really meaningful and fulfilling and authentic to them? Maybe that's one way of summarizing, what a better approach to AI might be.
I think it might be easier to approach in that way educators. But what I'm also finding what's really interesting is, when I'm like, oh yeah, you can offload all of this, it'll take you 10 minutes versus 3 hours, and even adults feel like, but that's cheating.
Yeah.
And for sure, like, we need a huge paradigm shift in education. Like, I feel like the question we should even start with is, what's the purpose of education? And then going from there with AI. But Sean's right, like, we're scrambling to keep up now because we've failed our kids with this whole social media piece. And the scary part for me, this is going to lead into a question here, is how good AI is at creating misinformation and disinformation. Yeah. And so, like, how as a society do we deal with the ethical challenges of that? Of facts versus opinions.
Yeah.
And
especially if AI is creating a lot of the misinformation or the algorithms that promote the misinformation, it's not like we can depend on AI to tell us what is information and what is fact, right? So, this seems like a critical task for educators. Hey, we need kind of a critical artifice, a filter, teach our kids like to equip, to be equipped with this filter. But at the same time, man, I don't know if they care. For the first time, I just did business ethics. I have this whole matrix thing where I'm like, red pill, blue pill. The red pill, you'll get the truth, underlying reality. Who wants the red pill? And none of the students wanted it. they're like, ooh, you know, and they're like, South Park has an episode how the red pill's just a bunch of poop everywhere. You know, nobody wants that. You know, and I'm like, yeah, it is poop. It's terrible. You know, reality at its joints. And so I think this question of like what brings about meaning and fulfillment in life, that could operate as a kind of filter, right? Because a lot of the disinformation, well, I guess it does provide meaning and fulfillment in some people's lives, right? I mean, you get paranoid, you start making up stories about, you know, how certain ideas come to be, and things get very bad quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have. Yes, thank you for that.
You don't have an answer?
That's a very good. I think that's the question, and you brought up social media as kind of a fundamentally harmful thing, and that's largely because these algorithms seem to control the behavior of our children. I mean, not to bring up a Star Trek episode, but it was predicted, you know, those little glasses and the video and yeah. So I always think of that when I'm sitting on my phone for what seemed like 5 minutes, but it ended up being half an hour, and going like, oh my gosh, am I part of the algorithm machine? Gosh,
Right.
we can't end up. We need a positive.
Well, you know, as I recall,
Yes.
it was an Android that solved that problem for the Enterprise. So
There you go.
We're okay. Yeah.
Data. We need a data.
Oh my gosh. So I guess, Brian, like you said, we can't end on that, but you know, Sean resurrected that very quickly with his prowess.
Yes, my skill.
I guess a general question that all three of us kind of kicked around when we were talking about meeting with you was, you have this skill or pattern of looking at different elements of life through different lenses. So you bring in skateboarding into the sensory experience, but also what that means in societal impacts and influences and all of those things. How do you apply that same skill, because I do believe it's a skill, to help keep your calmness and centeredness as something like AI comes into the world? Because what we're seeing is we're working with people that are stressed out about this.
Yeah.
And inevitably that in some way is impacting our ability as a society to ask the right questions, to make those things. So how do you go about making those connections between all those different worlds? And
yeah, well, no, I think thanks for that question. Here's the claim. What really provides humans meaning, fulfillment, are enrapturing multisensory experiences. And I think most of our digital interaction is just visual and auditory, and we lack this like tactile component, and then the flavor and the olfaction. And what I'm finding, you know, and I might use the example of coffee, which is a complete multisensory experience. It's almost religious for some people, but it is a way to kind of start your day in this completely multimodal, multisensory experience. And then you're just like, okay, I'm going to focus on how my all 5 or 6, right, including our balance, are kind of equipping me to find meaning and purpose in the world, instead of just relying on our visual, and sometimes even separately, just our auditory, where we're just listening to music. I think there has to be constant use of the hands, constant olfactory and you know, mouth feel engagement. Maybe cooking is another kind of example where you're just like completely engaged in a multisensory way. These breaks, I think, are crucial, right, to de-stress ourselves and just to try to make it to the kind of next digital engagement.